What's up, y'all? This is Chase, and before we hop into today's podcast, we want to share a message from today's sponsor, Seeds of Love. Seeds of Love bracelets are great. You've seen them on a couple of our podcasts for sure. They're beautiful, nice, while also being low-key. And the best thing about Seeds of Love, in addition to being a great piece of fashion, is their mission. Their mission is to empower village artisans in Guatemala. Every bracelet is handcrafted with love in Guatemala, and $1 from each bracelet goes to support local nonprofit organizations in Guatemala. They're available in over 10 colors, including rose gold, ocean teal, and royal blue. As well, they have stickers and other accessories that you could pair with your bracelets. If you have a loved one's birthday coming up, share some love and sow some love with high-quality bracelets with a purpose, where you can make a difference while also making a fashion statement. You know, what Josue tries to do every single podcast. Follow them on Instagram or Facebook at Seeds of Love Bracelets and go support them. And now for today's podcast.
Welcome to the Perspective Podcast. My name is Josue. As you guys probably know, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, I attended the Oral Roberts University. We preach at times here, but obviously it's not something we want to talk much about here on this podcast. And there's something else about me, but I can't seem to remember right now, so we'll keep going. And we just so happen to have Chase Brown here. As you guys already know by now, he's an aspiring philanthropic creative. He attended the University of North Texas. He was born in Texas, so everything is just Texas for him. But even though that may be true, Texas doesn't have many beaches, but he still loves very long walks on the beach. Why is that? I have no idea, but I'm hoping we get into that this episode. Is that bad? It's not the way we do it.
No, you right.
Galveston?
But, I
That
mean,
doesn't count, right?
South Padre Island?
Is that really Texas, though?
Yeah.
I never been. Sorry, I
North
never thought it was
north
like
of Brownsville.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just never thought Padre was like in Texas.
I mean, just because it's a Spanish name doesn't mean it's in Mexico.
That's true.
What is it?
That's true. That was my assumption, I mean, that and Galveston, besides that, is not like many.
Yeah, Galveston is a port. That's not a beach. 100%.
Yeah.
But it's okay. You'll learn these Texas ways eventually.
I am.
My Congolese friend.
I'm still trying to get the hang of it. It's been a few years of me being here, so maybe after a few more years, I'll be able to.
Yeah, and I guess it makes it easier whenever literally Texas runs through your veins.
It does.
Like I got barbecue sauce in my veins.
I do enjoy
Shout
Texas.
out to Austin.
Shout out to Austin. I do enjoy Texas though. Besides other states, I feel like Texas is a good place to be.
Yeah. Well, I guess quick question to the listeners. Y'all can hit us up whenever y'all want. This is a debate that I think me, Austin, and our friend Chris Holby were having over the weekend, where I would say barbecue sauce is greater than cheese, except for queso. If you take queso out of the cheese category and make queso its own thing, I would personally say and would take barbecue sauce over any other form of cheese. Yes. It's just straight up. Just whatever question it is, yes. I would say that I would probably give the edge to queso over barbecue sauce. But if you're trying to give me a craft single, if you're trying to give me shredded cheese, if you're trying to give me even just only cheese that's on pizza, it's like, no.
That's interesting.
Barbecue sauce.
Because I feel like you could do more with cheese,
I mean, you can, but just think of the taste. Barbecue sauce is amazing. And all the different kinds of barbecue sauce.
Okay.
But that's just the Texan speaking here.
We'll have to let the listeners debate that one.
Oh, yeah. We'll let the debates go wild.
Hopefully they'll be able to get back to us on that.
But yeah, what are we doing today? My guy?
Man, we're having a conversation. Okay, let me phrase it correctly the way you said it. Right. So obviously we know as you guys have listened to us for a number of years, we know we're big about community. So essentially, like showing grace and calling people higher. I think that's an important thing within community. So how do we kind of go about doing that?
Exactly. How do we balance those things?
Balance those things.
How do we love people well in both of those areas? Because they're seemingly contradictory in a way, where it's like if you give someone grace, and that means that some people think that you're kind of making an excuse for where they're at.
Yeah.
Or sort of forgiving them for where they're at rather than giving them wisdom or calling them higher. So talk about that today. But Mr. Bass Pro Shop.
Bass Pro Shop.
What do you think?
Man, as I'm thinking about this, I'm like, the first example that comes to mind is I just think what would have been like to walk with Jesus, like while he was on the earth. Talk about calling people higher. Like he was it. He was the ideal, the Son of God, man of God, all the God himself, right, in the flesh, as we talk about. But I just imagine him walking for 3 years with the people that he walked with all their questions and their doubting and their unbelief and their mistakes and everything. Obviously the Bible doesn't give us every single day interactions that he must have had with them. So we can only imagine what it would have been like to walk with Jesus on a day-to-day. And I just try to picture like, man, if Jesus was living with me day-to-day, the amount of grace he would show me and all these different things. I've always taken that approach when it comes to calling people higher and also showing them grace, because I'm like, man, if Jesus did it, I'm not above doing it. I'm not above showing people grace and mercy. But then also, wanting to call people higher as well, because obviously the goal isn't for people to just stay where they are, is to continue to grow and all that good stuff. So those are some of my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, man. As you were talking about that, one of the things that came to mind, and this is more so of probably like a tangent, and then I'll come back around to the question, but I think one reason why we might not like calling people higher or us being called higher is because I think in this culture, we're not very good at conflict resolution and communication skills. And so whenever it comes to telling someone like, hey, like I think that you could potentially do better in this area, and I think that I could do better in this area, like not being hypocritical, but being like graceful and humble in that area. I think that's one reason why we don't like to do that. We don't know how to articulate it. We don't know, we don't have experience in that type of conflict. And I think a lot of people, whenever they don't have those type of skills, just would choose to not engage in any sort of conflict or constructive criticism or conversations and shy away from those opportunities. But at the end of the day, then you don't get to develop those skills. And especially as our culture, this is probably true in Europe as well, is increasingly having communications through a screen rather than in person. It's something where then you could just block someone, or you can unfollow them or something.
Sure can.
Whenever you see something in them that you don't like or that you disagree with. And so then even more so, that kind of doubles down on the lack of like conflict resolution skills that we can build and prevents the amount of feedback and positive feedback that we could give to people and can give us this sort of backdoor idea that, oh, it's not actually necessary to provide people feedback. And then as a result of that, sometimes whenever people give us feedback, we can take it personal because it's like, wait, I'm nice enough to not give you feedback. Why are you giving me feedback? It's almost like a negative in a way.
Yeah, I've learned to, I think I'm going to call it I learned it because I'm a fellow basement dweller. For those of you guys that follow Tim Ross in the basement, shout out to the podcast. yeah, I've learned even so crazy. One day before Bible study, I think maybe a few weeks back before Bible study, we sat here and we listened to one of the podcasts, and he was just emphasizing vulnerability and the need for that, especially in community and
Yeah.
everything else. We went to Bible study, and that was probably one of the most like vulnerable I felt people were in Bible study about what they're presently going through. So it wasn't like, oh, these are all these perfect Christians in this house talking about God. It was like, no, these are these redeemed Christians in this house that still got struggles, but they're still here and wanting to grow and everything. So I bring that up because it's like, I think one thing that I tried to do in this time, being in a position, I don't even want to call it leadership because I'm a servant, right? I serve, uh, serving the people that God has called me to. In this position, it's from a place of like sharing with them my struggles, because I be telling them what I be going through. I gotta craft it in a way to where it's not, so bad. But even with all of that, like I have to be able to communicate with them, not so they can know my business. I don't. The hope isn't just for them to know my business, because what's the point of that? It's more so for them to know that, hey, like even in the midst of going through whatever, you know, you can still trust God, you can still be in community and everything else. And so, what does that do for calling people higher? I think it gives you a point of being able to relate to people because they know like you're not perfect. I remember one of our friends. I shared something with him once, and then he was like, "You too?" No, what you mean, you too? He's like, "Man, I never thought you as well." And I was like, "Yeah, me too." Like, Paul lays it out beautifully in Philippians 4. He's like, I haven't yet attained, I'm still pressing forward to the things that Christ Jesus has called me to, that I may lay a hold of that which Christ Jesus has laid a hold of me for. That's like a crazy thing to think about. But it's like, he emphasized the point that I haven't attained it yet. I haven't been made perfect in that sense yet.
Yeah.
I'm still in this process of growing. So I think if you approach people with that heart posture and then know that you're not here trying to, just be the one correcting them or whatever, it gives you a foot in their life to be able to, gracefully call them higher, because they know the areas you struggled and they can call you higher. So in return, you're able to do the same for them as well. Because there's nothing worse than when someone is always telling you you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And you feel like you can't even do the same for them. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, because even in that, like, waiting 3 weeks to give that feedback, like, that's a sign of showing grace right there. And that's a sign of trusting the Lord in timing. Something that Josiah said that really hit me that I never really thought of before is like, timeliness is godliness. Basically saying if you're able to give encouragement or feedback at just the right time, like that's something that's of the Lord. Like that's patience playing itself out right there. And I think like the first thing that came to mind whenever this question was asked, and it was going off of your thought, is I think just as is the Father's character, like primarily we should give grace in what is going on in life. And whenever we are dealing with people and engaging with people. And oftentimes bringing it down to like this lowest common denominator is like whenever that's been a favorite phrase of mine recently. Jeez. I just realized I say that a lot. But whenever giving people feedback, my kind of rule of thumb is to wait until I see it as a habit, and then from there give the feedback. And the only way that you're able to see if something is a habit is over the course of time.
right.
But to even get to that point to see if it's a habit, you have to give them grace and forgive them in those times leading up to you catching that it is a habit and then giving that feedback. Because people can so often be out of character like one time, but that's not worthy of giving feedback most of the time because it's out of their character. It's out of their like nature, their kind of mindsets, their habits. And if you are going to give feedback, off of just one time. Like, be very specific in the example that you're talking about. Because oftentimes, if it's just off of like one example that you're giving feedback to, people are going to be defensive, like naturally.
Yeah.
But if you bring that particular example and bring that encouragement of saying like, hey, like, I've never seen this before in you, like, ever at all. Like, I've never seen you struggle with gossiping. I've never seen you struggle with pride. But like, I just wanted to bring this one example because I don't want this to turn into a habit because I see how great you are. Framing it that way. But then the thing is as well, it's interesting going towards giving people grace, giving people time, and seeing if something is a habit. Naturally, in that, in some sort of sense, friendship is developed in that. And so friendship is the key and the foundation for giving feedback. And I'd never seen this before, and it's interesting that this is what we talked about because I didn't think of it before we just started recording, but shout out Danny Bryan. But he kind of led group on Tuesday. We went through John 15, and in John 15 it says, starting in verse 12, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." Commandment equals loving one another. "Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you to do." So, okay, commanding, there's two parts of that. Going back to the previous verse, you're following his commandments if you love people. But then also there are a lot of other commandments that the Lord gave that if we follow those to the best of our ability, trusting in his grace rather than in our perfection, that like we are his friends. That's really cool to be a friend of the Lord. But something that just kind of hit me that I never really thought of is that a lot of times we say, and I'm still working this out mentally, but we say, "Oh, Jesus was a friend to sinners." It's interesting there, though, in verse 14, it says, "You are my friends if you do what I command." And so kind of what I think was a possibility here, whenever we say Jesus being a friend to sinners, was that they considered him a friend because of his love for them. But maybe he just didn't consider them a friend because, they didn't do what he commanded them to do. Like they didn't love. But he was still open and accessible enough, and his character was good enough to where even though like potentially he didn't consider them a friend, they considered him a friend. And so us asking ourselves the question, do we have the kind of character? Do we love people well enough to where they consider us a friend? And at that point, be open to receiving feedback from us. Because the biggest part of feedback, I think, is the two biggest parts of feedback is obviously articulating it well, not saying it in a bashing way, but saying it in like a graceful way, as you said, Josue, but also asking the question, is this person in a good place to receive this feedback? Do they consider me a friend? Have I loved them well enough to where they would be able to receive this from me? Thinking of it in their shoes rather than just in our own shoes.
Yeah, I think I want to say in Proverbs. In Proverbs. Who wrote Proverbs?
Solomon.
Yeah, Solomon. Yeah, I think in Proverbs, Solomon makes the point of like, something about like you were saying, words from a friend is like sweet, like something like that.
Sweet, or like nice words from someone is like arrows, but like basically feedback from a friend is like sweet honey or something like that.
Yeah, and so that just emphasizes your point of like, being able to have friendship with somebody, because we see it in our day, especially being believers, where believers have all sorts of feedback and opinions on other believers living their life, and they want to type essays on their comment section on social media. I'm like, bro, like, what are you doing? You don't know them.
Yep.
But I think it's something you said earlier. They bring up a thought of like, it has to be something where you're around the person and It's not just like a one-time thing. I
Mm-hmm.
think to me that's why first impressions always been so detrimental for people that just make their impressions about people off of the first impression. I'm like, are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do you not know that you could have found somebody at the worst time in their life, at they were going through something crazy, going through something stressful,
Mm-hmm.
and you make your opinion off of that one moment in time, and it's just like how ridiculous is that? Like if I was to meet you at your worst time, I could have made the same assumption about you, but I can't. You got to do it over time as you get to know the person,
Yeah.
to be able to fully like grasp. Because someone could actually be really, really bad. And the one day they were having a good day, that's the day that you had the impression of them. So that's just an added bonus there for those of you guys
Dang.
with first impressions. But yeah,
That's
no,
good.
I think being in community with people, being around people allows you to be able to speak into their life with the opportunity that they're able also to speak into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Because it shouldn't always be one way. You know what I'm saying? It has to be
Mm-hmm.
both ways where they can speak in your life too and tell you, bro, you tripping, or bro, you're doing really, really good. You know what I'm saying? So hopefully we're able to be in those kinds of relationships. First John chapter 1, I'm gonna butcher a little bit, but I think I'm gonna get pretty close. It says, if you're walking in darkness, don't boast and lie against the truth. Right? If you're walking in darkness and you say you know him, don't boast and lie against the truth. But if you walk in the light, right? So living rightly, if you walk in the light as he is in the light, because it's talking about God lives in this light. That's who he is, nature. If you walk in the light as he's in the light, the evidence of us as believers walking in the light, it's not that we pray more. It's not that God brings us up to heaven every 2 days. That's not it. He says, if you walk in the light as he's in the light, then you will have fellowship with one another. So the evidence of us actually walking in the light, the Bible says, is in our fellowship with one another. So it's important to be in fellowship, in community with other believers. That's evidence of you truly walking in the light as we're called to do. So with all that being said, I think being in community with people is great because it allows you to be able to gracefully speak into their lives. Ephesians 4 says that we need to season our words with salt so they can impart grace to those that hear it. So just because you're mean by nature doesn't mean that's how you should talk to people. I'm just blunt. I'm just no. You're not just blunt. You got to season your words with salt. There's so many ways to say the same thing, but it can have so many different meanings. You know what I'm saying? So learn how to season your word with salt for the purpose of it imparting grace to those that hear it. And then not just you being blunt. I got to tell my truth. No, stop telling your truth. Learn how to.
Exactly. And if fellowship is the goal, as you just said, Josue, then from there, and it's something that people will know the Lord by. It says, the Lord will know which is mine by how you love one another. Then we need to understand and get back into the framework that, okay, fellowship is the goal. My comfortability is not the goal. This is paramount. Like this is a necessity. And so asking ourselves whenever we want to give feedback to someone, like, hey, is this feedback beneficial to fellowship? Or is this something where maybe I can learn to grow to accept and bear the burden of living with? Do I need to grow my patience in this time? Do I need to grow, following the Lord over following my preferences in a way? But just remember that basically, like fellowship, as you said, Josue, is like the primary here. And everything else will come alongside if we pursue that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man. But we only got a couple minutes left here. Any last things you want to share?
No, I think it's a beautiful thing that we're able to be partakers of the body. Bible says we're members of one another and we're called to be in relationship with one another. I think what you just said there at the end, let's not live by our preferences. We're called to die to those things. It says that we need to live lowliness means you got to put your preferences down. There's even verses that says prefer others above yourself, you know. So we're not doing this thing by our preferences simply. Let's do it by truth, by the Spirit of God, and to keep peace and unity and call each other higher, but make sure there's grace there as you're doing that. So
Exactly, man. So yeah, y'all, that'll be a wrap for us today. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. I guess one quick thing. This talk applies to the business world and the philanthropic world, not just for friendships. So try to remember this in our jobs, in our entrepreneurial efforts, and our charitable work, everything that we're doing. But yeah, all of our information will be included in the description below. If you want to support us, the outreaches, podcast, the app, everything that we're doing. Until next time, y'all, much love. God bless.